this meeting of the MARTA External Relations Committee to order. Please and thank you.
Thank you. Roberta Abdul Salam.
Present.
Robbie Ash.
I'm present.
Stacey Blakely.
Present.
Jim Durrett. William Floyd.
I'm here.
Roderick Farson. Brian Glover. Rita Hardage.
I'm here.
Russell McMurray. Al Pond. Catherine Powers. Rita Scott.
Present.
Reginald Snyder. Christopher Tomlinson. Thomas Worthy. There are 7 board members present.
Thank you, Ms. Huff. I'll ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the February 18, 2021 External Relations Committee.
I move to approve. This is Hardage.
Thank you, Frida.
Second, this is Roberta.
Thank you, Roberta. The motion's properly made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, are there any abstentions? Are there any no votes? The motion carries unanimously. The next item on the agenda is a briefing on the I-285 top-end update. Mr. Prescott, please.
Good morning, Chairman Ash, committee members, and Mr. Parker on this rainy kind of a day. Now that the Georgia 400 Express Lane project with the BRT included has been advertised regionally, the focus is now shifted to the I-285 corridor. I'm Larry Prescott, the AGM of Infrastructure, and today with me I have Kane Williamson from ATL, their Chief of Planning Officer, as well as Colleen Kiernan, our Senior Director of Government and Community Affairs. We want to discuss what has been done to integrate transit into I-285 Express Lane program, the projected schedules, and an illustrative funding plan. Next, please. So here's our program base maps. The blue highlight on the right is covering the MARTA scope from the Covington Highway area all the way around to the Perimeter Area Parkway, covering Fulton County and DeKalb counties. And then the red highlight on the left is the top end that ATL is covering with their scope. As you can see, there's some overlap on the northeast side. So MARTA has taken the lead on this portion in coordination with ATL's consultant, so there is no duplication of effort. Next slide, please. MARTA essentially started last year on the I-285, I-20 Covington Highway area due to GDOT's early solicitation to replace the bridges along the I-285 east side. Since then, we have moved up to Perimeter Center Parkway. We have also been coordinating with GDOT on integrating transit into their express lane process with their alignments in the center, as you can see in the photo on the lower right, on the east side. And then the photo on the left on the top end is on the outside of the 285 corridor. And in doing so, we've done some minor asks, which would assist with future transit expansion, such as pushing end vents or retaining walls back a few feet here and there, and coordinating stop locations to save on future costs. Next slide. MARTA and ATL have coordinated on scoping of our consultants, as I said, to ensure collaboration rather than duplication. The study scopes are basically the same with specific separation of supportive scopes, with ATL focusing on regional plans, which includes identification of assessment of capital funding and sources, whereas MARTA is on the technical transit system sides and stakeholder coordination. Next slide. Here are some examples of what our outcome and deliverables will be. 2D technical is for the coordination with GDOT and stakeholders, whereas the 3D is more for interagency coordination and possible public future exhibits. And as well as we'll have study implementation plans, and which sums everything up for our regional coordination. Next slide. So as I stated earlier, MARTA started concept studies early in order to keep up with GDOT's progression. And since then, ATL has joined in with these parallel dates and action items for this year in stakeholder coordination on the concepts moving forward into planning and design with a goal of a seamless presentation to the councils and board members and other governing boards. Next slide. So what we did was looking at the aligning with the GDOT program milestones. The lower graphic is taken from a GDOT website with starts with Georgia 400 on the top bar, but then progresses down in the I-285 top end east, top end or 285 east side, the top end west, and then finally the west side total. So what we're doing right now, if you look at that top arrow, sorry, go back one. The first arrow on the top, the conceptual design and the ensuring the certainty of funding is really needed for the first quarter in 2023. That aligns with the first project of the I-285 design on the top end east. The remaining arrows cover preliminary and final design, which will follow suit with construction and completion of the BRT opening coinciding with the fourth quarter 2028 completion of the top end east and east side express lane projects. The top end west and west side will follow with completion in the second quarter of 2023, right? Or 2032, sorry, right now. So now I'm going to turn it over to Colleen to discuss the illustrative funding allocation next. Next slide.
Thank you, Larry, and good morning, Chairman Ash, Mr. Parker, members of the committee. Listening to Mayor Floyd's questions at the External Relations Committee last month, he was really getting at how we're going to be able to move this project forward from a funding perspective. And he asked for us to come up with a communications plan and a plan. And so I wanted to first say that this has not been shared with anybody. None of the people on this list of potential funders, for example, have seen this before. And this really is representing my own thinking, my sitting down with an Excel spreadsheet and playing with the numbers at a possible path forward for the three components of this 285 project. So I started by taking the overall project cost that the ATL has included in their Atlanta Regional Transit Plan. And then I thought about what sort of federal funding we can and should expect for this project. And although the current capital investment grant program, Small Starts, right now has a limit of $100 million, we believe that there will be changes made in the Surface Transportation Reauthorization that is that will happen by September 30th of this year, that will both increase the cap of the project that will be eligible, as well as increase the amount of federal funding to a maximum of $320 million from the current limitation of $100 million. So all of these amounts are totally reasonable. I basically assigned a 50% amount for the federal share, although it could be higher, as high as even 80%, but depending upon the situation. So with that sort of conservative look of 50% from the federal government, the state of Georgia, I think, could be a potential partner here as well. We have, of course, we'll get into this in a minute, but the new Transit Trust Fund, which, knock on wood, the Georgia Senate will pass today and the governor will sign, which the fiscal note of which should generate somewhere in the ballpark of $40 million annually. Additionally, there is the ATL bond list that they will submit every year, so that would be another avenue for state funding. And there are potentially other options as well. So based on the amount of money we expect to be in the Georgia Transit Trust Fund annually, I assigned another chunk, approximately the same as an annual appropriation that we would expect to a request from the state of Georgia. Then I looked to our county partners, DeKalb County and Fulton County, and the plans have been for them to assess additional sales tax to their residents to help pay for these transit expansion projects. As those of you who have been following the Fulton County conversation know that there's not great enthusiasm for that idea. So I thought about ways that the county could contribute, and this is something that the ATL has floated, is using a TIFIA loan that would be secured by county general funds, but there would be other avenues to do that as well. So those are somewhat arbitrary numbers for DeKalb and Fulton County. That's proportionate to sort of what the leftover amount was. Then, in Cobb County as well. Then looking at the cities who are really pushing this project, there's the executive committee of the mayors of the 7 cities who have been meeting. Essentially, I just looked at their general fund budgets for the DeKalb County for the DeKalb County cities, and took the $40 million and assigned them proportionally. So I think this chunks up the project to get to the full amount needed in a way that seems a little bit more manageable for each of the entities that would like to see this happen, to figure out a way to come up with those funds. So cities have a number of options that would use a new value capture revenue mechanism. So those would include a tax allocation district, a special services district, or perhaps ground lease revenue bonding. So I think it's exciting that we have these avenues to explore, and a lot of constituencies who are interested in making these projects happen. So this is just really meant to open the door for conversation, not be MARTA telling anybody what to do, but this is just a potential path for how we could come up with the funding needed to make this project real. So with that, I think we will entertain any discussion.
Thank you both. Mayor Floyd.
Next slide.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor Floyd.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, I really appreciate the effort that you all, but everybody there has put into this thing, because I think the most important thing that we can do right now is begin this discussion. And I think in order to do that, we've got to kind of open the floor, open the box up, and let's see what's available to it now. I think probably one of the most important things we could do right now, Chairman Ash, is to create some sort of vehicle to further the discussion. And I think that's what I see this as an attempt to do, is to get a real discussion going about how are we going to pay. I think we have probably, in all likelihood, run the gamut on sales tax. So we've got to look at everything from the stuff that Colleen has listed here, things that are not legally responsible right now. I mean, not legally allowed right now, to things that may take changes in the law. I think all of that has to be entered into this discussion, because I think, and also one of the important things is how this ties to economic development. And I don't think we can miss that connection somewhere. So I am encouraged to see this conversation begin. I think the next 9 months are critical in beginning this discussion and beginning to get things out for discussion that maybe we've been afraid or reluctant to talk about in the past. So I commend you for bringing this up, and let's get it started. I'm ready.
Thank you, Mayor Floyd. One thing I didn't mention is we did do some back of the envelope calculations about a tax allocation district to find that for every $1 million of property tax generated in a TAD district, we could bond for a 20-year TAD $16 million, and for a 25-year TAD, we could bond $19 million. So that sort of, if you look at the funding slide again, kind of tells you that like the amounts that are needed to generate are, in the scheme of things, not overwhelming.
Okay, I think it's, and one of the things, Colleen, I think you're trying to do here, but it's important for us to get as good a hand as we can on what these revenue sources will provide and how, and the structure about how we have to go about to do that. Because, I mean, we don't want to waste a lot of time talking about something that's not going to generate enough money to make a difference. So, but we've got to have some pretty good estimates or pretty good ideas about how much these funding sources will provide. And quite honestly, in the MARTA area, MARTA is the one, in my opinion, that has to carry this discussion. I don't think there's anybody else that's going to do it. I haven't seen any indication of anybody willing to begin this discussion without some sort of organizational structure around it from somewhere.
Chairman Ash, can I mention something?
Yes, Mr. Brucker.
Yeah, appreciate those comments, Mayor Floyd. And I think that this conversation is presented around a single project, but I would also offer that the robust conversation that we need to have is definitely applicable to a whole lot of other opportunities. If we zoom into the city of Atlanta, we know that we have a bigger appetite for project lists than we have funding. So there are we shouldn't view this conversation that we're beginning around funding sources as just how to fund this singular project. I think it applies across the MARTA jurisdictions.
This is Rod Frierson. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I had a question. So one of the things that was mentioned was about ground lease funding. How does that work? I mean, is this property that the counties own and that they use something to generate funds from it? How does that work in the picture of funding a project like this?
Thanks for that question, Mr. Pierson. This is really Jacob Vallo's little baby project that he has really figured out how to do, and I don't think is on to be able to answer, so I'll do the best that I can, and we can talk about it certainly at the next meeting with his expertise. But it could be either MARTA owning the property or the city or the county owning the property, and on that 99-year lease, as how we develop on MARTA's property, we can estimate the amount of revenue that we would generate over those 99 years and also bond against it. So I think for one of the Georgia 400 stops, we figured out that we could generate about $8 million of bond revenue from a ground lease revenue bond on the site that had been identified for the park and ride area. So it's not a singular going to solve the problem, but it is a potential piece of the pie that can get us to the whole pie.
Sure, definitely. And thank you for explaining that. And once again, it is an opportunity for us to find different ways. And I agree with my colleague Bill, in that we have to have this conversation on how we're going to fund these transportation projects in all different ways. And instead of going back to the single source that we're used to going back to, and that's sales taxes. So that's great. The economic development piece. How did you see that impact in this funding project? I mean, how does that work when we talk about doing this type of transit around these corridors? How did you see that work?
Well, I think that transit is an asset, and we're finding that companies, as they're choosing to locate in Metro Atlanta, are considering accessibility for their workforce and the quality of life for the type of employees that they want to attract, and whether all of those considerations. So I think that proximity to transit is an economic value, and I think so if we can connect the value that we bring to the people on those sites and give them a mechanism to help pay for that asset, I think that we can be mutually successful. So I think we will all do well if we all do well.
Sure. I would just try to think of ways to frame that in terms of, once again, making their commute and that travel time less expensive, and that in many ways impacts a lot of other things. But okay, thank you.
Rod, one thing I might add here, Bill Floyd, about that is the one of the things we're trying to do in DeKalb County right now is understand the impact of tax abatements, if you will, property tax abatements and the impact that they have. Are there long-term positive impacts on that, and also the halo effect? And I think one of the things that we've got to begin to have this conversation about is MARTA getting access somehow to property tax. And I don't mean that from being able to charge people property tax. I don't think that's a realistic approach, but I do think MARTA being able to participate in the increase in property values due to its expansion of service or its increase in the level of service. And certainly Kensington and Indian Road or Indian stations are perfect examples of how that might impact the money that MARTA is putting into those two stations. And what's happening around there, property values are certainly going to go up. And how do we begin to understand the value of that and understand what kind of positive aspects that might add to future transit development? You know, those are some of the things that I think this conversation has to include, which has to be thorough.
Yeah,
Thanks, Mayor Floyd.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
I'll just point out here that this, sure, go ahead, Larry.
I was just going to throw it on top of the economic development. There are also the aspects of the workforce connectivity in a radial alignment that connects South DeKalb to the top end perimeter areas. So that's also another economic driver that goes both ways.
I was going to also point out, Mayor Floyd, that the Special Services District, which was the middle of the three options I listed, is a really great way to get at that, because the Georgia Constitution allows a municipality a great deal of flexibility in both drawing the district and figuring out whether it's a fee or increase in millage rate or whatever it is. So I think that is an underutilized tool. Of course, that would require a referendum, and there's the limitation that only 10% of the property value, like the assessment can't go higher than that. So it again can't solve all of, can't be the single source for funding anything, but I think it can also be an important contribution to getting the pie to be whole.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that there's not a silver bullet out there or one thing that's going to fix it all. It's got to be some sort of comprehensive overall program. And I'm wondering, I read with some interest the other day about the firestorm about toll on managed lanes contributing to transit. Are we avoiding that discussion, Colleen, right now? Or not?
No, Mayor Paul has made that suggestion in a couple of different forums, and I think it's a really intriguing idea. I don't know, Kane, if the ATL has done any analysis on the potential revenue for that source.
Hey, this is Chris Tomlinson. Yeah.
Oh, hey, Chris, I didn't see that you joined us. Hey.
Yeah, it's one of the ideas that's on the table. The levels of additions on tolling that were brought up by the mayors annually would not result in a lot of money. One of the proposals they were talking about was an additional penny on each of the trips. You'd be generating maybe a couple $100,000 even if you applied that to all trips. And I'm talking about through the entire system. And you wouldn't want to do that. You would want to target those trips and money going to the quarter that's in use. So now you're at a fraction of it. So at least in that approach, it doesn't really generate much, but there are other things and mechanisms we're looking at. And as I said to the top end executive group, I shared with this board, we need to continue to look at every and all options and not preclude anything right now. So in the they're forming a finance subcommittee. And I think through that group, we'll be looking at this and other proposals.
I'll add my 2 cents or half a cent or whatever the perspective is to this, which is Colleen's reference to Special Services District reminds me that one of the opportunities MARTA has because of our constitutional amendment and the fact that it is a living, walking, breathing exemption to the state's uniformity clause is that while we may have either current or prospective future jurisdictional partners who do not wish to impose a countywide tax, countywide sales tax, the MARTA amendment would permit us to impose a smaller than entire county sales tax, such that a part of a county that wished to and would benefit from MARTA service and could pay for it would be able to do so. And the example of, I mean, the best example of that already having been done is the city of Atlanta's own more MARTA money. That would not, under normal constitutional structures, be permitted, but it is because of the MARTA amendment. And so, you know, I fully understand, and having done this now for 10 years, appreciate that there are some of our jurisdictions that are not interested in having further conversation about countywide taxes. But I don't, as we try and keep all of our options on the table, I think we should remember that smaller than entire county portions might have a different view on that. You know, and I want to leave that. And I also want to echo the comment that Bill made, that I think value capture is an incredibly important part of how we do what we do going forward. I don't think it's going to be the entire cake, but I think it's an important part of the layer. And it, you know, it goes to Jacob's point. In the city of Atlanta or in Metro Atlanta, access to transit, specifically access to fixed route, a significant capital investment, which right now primarily means heavy rail stations, is our equivalent of the waterfront. I mean, it is precious and limited real estate that we are not making very much more of. And there is a premium generated by proximity to it. And to the extent that we increase it, that the value that is created by that, we should figure out a way to try and harness to help us finance creating that value. I mean, that also is not a new concept. The tax allocation districts have been using that for years, and those are not tax abatements. It's, you know, those are allocating dollars that would not otherwise be generated. And so hopefully avoiding some of the controversy associated with tax abatements. But again, I think an important option to keep on the table. And I appreciate Mayor Floyd's leadership in pushing us to push this issue.
And Chairman Ash, I might make a recommendation to you here, if you would allow me, is I think probably maybe if you would consider creating some sort of subcommittee, if you will, that focuses on this as we begin to expand this discussion, because I think first of all, the MARTA board needs to be involved in it without any question. All right. And there's a proper way to do that. But I think the discussion can also move out to these mayors in North Fulton, the mayors all the way from the Microsoft project on the west side of Atlanta to Tucker, or to Peachtree Corners, or to other areas like that, or members of the ATL board, or MARTA committee members, or people like that we may be able to include in these discussions as we begin this, what I see as a very intensive discussion period about how to go about this process. So I would suggest that you consider that.
I will discuss that with our chairwoman and see how she wishes to give me permission to proceed.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Well, thank you all for this. We will move to the next item on our agenda, which is a briefing from Stephanie Fisher, the media impressions update. Ms. Fisher, please.
Good morning, Chairman Ash, Vice Chair Scott, Mr. Parker, Ms. Mullinax, and committee members. It's a pleasure to come before you to provide an overview of our media impressions for November 2020 to February 2021. Next slide, please. In November, we released two major press releases. One of them announced the extension of Mr. Parker's contract as general manager and CEO. The other informed the public about virtual meetings being held to discuss proposed transit enhancements along Cleveland Avenue and Metropolitan Parkway. Next slide. There were 472 news stories in November that mentioned MARTA, almost all of them positive or neutral in tone, and that resulted in a $5 million advertising value equivalent. The MARTA Connect to Vote program that provided subsidized Uber rides to the polls received the most coverage. We'd sent out a press release on the program in late October. Bus Ride Magazine ran a lengthy article on how MARTA has handled COVID that featured an interview with Mr. Parker. And the AJC covered the dismissal of a lawsuit filed against the Essential Service Plan's reduced bus routes, which did result in a small percent of negative coverage. Next slide. In December, we sent out press releases announcing the appointment of MARTA's new general counsel, Leah Ward-Sears, and 3 new board members, Stacey Blakely, Katie Powers, and Reggie Snyder. MARTA Connect to Vote was again in the news as we announced the offering of subsidized Uber rides for the upcoming runoff election. Next slide. MARTA was mentioned 169 times in news stories in December, much lower than November, but pretty typical for the holidays. And the majority of it was positive or neutral in tone. The Little Baby Coat giveaway at West End received a lot of great coverage, helped us earn about $3 million in advertising value equivalent. WSB featured MARTA in a year-end retrospective on COVID's impact in Atlanta. And while MPD helping to catch an assault suspect and turn him over to Atlanta police was a positive story, and in fact resulted in a commendation for MARTA police officer Hartman, because it was crime-related, it did register as negative. Next slide, please. January was a very busy month. We sent out 10 press releases that included the promotion of Collie Greenwood to Deputy General Manager of Operations, our affordable housing partnership with Morgan Stanley and the National Equity Fund, and the track replacement project, TR4 at Canterbury Junction, that was coming up in February. Next slide. MARTA was mentioned 414 times in news stories in January, and once again, almost all of them were positive or neutral in tone. The track replacement project was covered extensively by local news outlets and industry publications, and that helped boost our advertising value equivalent for the month to $6 million. And Mr. Parker was featured in Georgia Trend magazine as one of the 100 most influential Georgians for 2021. Next slide. In February, we distributed 2 press releases and 2 media advisories leading up to the TR4 project. We sent out a release applauding the federal mask mandate on public transportation. And in partnership with DeKalb County, we announced the opening of a large COVID vaccination site at Doraville Station. Next slide. We received a lot of news coverage last month, 669 stories, most of them on the track replacement project north of Lindbergh. Every major television, radio, and print news outlet in town covered the project and the customer impact. And we updated the media daily with details of the progress made overnight, and we provided time-lapse video of the previous 24 hours of work. Next slide. Providing that updated information and electronic press kits make it easier for news outlets to cover our stories, and that leads to well-informed customers and a boost to our brand. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Are there any questions? Hearing none, I will ask my colleagues if there are other matters to come before the External Relations Committee at this time. Hearing none, I will adjourn this meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Ash. Appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. This is Frida. If everyone is not opposed, we will go ahead and start the Audit Committee, which is to follow the External Relations Committee. And I can call this meeting to order. First item on the agenda is approval of the November 2020 Audit Committee meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
You want me to call the roll?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am. Please call the roll.
Roberta Abdul Salam.
Present.
Robert Ash,
Present.
Stacy Blakely,
Present.
Jim Durrett, William Floyd,
I'm here.
Roderick Frierson,
Present.
Brian Glover, Peter Hardage,
Present.
Russell McMurray, Al Pond, Catherine Powers, Rita Scott, Reginald Snyder.
Present. I wasn't sure you could hear me. Could you hear me?
No, I didn't, but I have you marked present.
Right.
Reginald Snyder, Christopher Tomlinson, Thomas Worthy. We have 7 board members present.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a motion to approve the November 2020 Audit Committee meeting minutes?
So moved. Ash.
Thank you, Mr. Ash. Do we have a
Second, seconded by Rod Frierson.
Thank you, Mr. Frierson. Do we have any abstentions? Do we have any no votes? The minutes are approved. The second item on our agenda is a resolution authorizing a modification in contractual authorization for professional services for an internal audit GRC automation tool LOA L46790. Emil?
Thank you, Mrs. Hardage. Mrs. Hardage, Mr. Parker, members of the MARTA Board of Directors and EMT members, I'd like to present Resolution LOA L46790. This resolution covers the technology platform called ACL GRC. GRC stands for Governance, Risk, and Control, which is being used today by all employees in the Internal Audit Department to schedule, plan, document, and execute every internal audit engagement at MARTA. From a technology point of view, this is the heart of the organization. This is our secure virtual warehouse and secure virtual factory. With every audit engagement, we receive data and information from various internal MARTA departments or external vendors and consultants for auditing. We store this information securely in ACL. Additionally, we schedule and plan the required audit hours and audit steps, and then execute and document the entire audit in ACL. At the end of the process, we issue our audit reports using this technology. You know, indeed, this is a 21st century digital warehouse and a digital factory where my employees, and myself included, we do our work every day. When COVID hit this time last year, with the help of this audit technology, the Department of Internal Audit seamlessly transitioned from working in the office every day to teleworking from our homes without slowing down at all. Financially speaking, last year this technology cost us $77,000. The proposed resolution will allow us to extend this contract with ACL for additional 3 years and lock in a price of $77,972 per year for each of the next 3 years, for a total of $233,916. In percentage terms, this represents a 1.3% step up in the annual price, but the benefit is that it locks that price for the next 3 years. As outlined in the resolution agenda report and in the procurement resolution, the current contract value is $77,000, which we have already paid. The additional funds to be authorized amount to $233,916 for a combined total 3-year period amount of $310,916. I need to mention at this point that these funds are already including in our run rate operational budget in the Department of Internal Audit. So the authorization is really to renew and extend this contract for another 3 years. Mrs. Heritage, with this, I respectfully request approval of the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Do we have a motion to approve the resolution?
I'll move. This is Robbie.
Do we have any, a second, please?
A second, Rod Frierson.
Thank you, Mr. Frierson. Do we have any discussion?
Yes, I just had a question. So this this software platform, it was mentioned that it includes all audits. Is this all audits from all the other audits that are done throughout the enterprise, or is this just the ones that we do for the internal?
This primarily serves the Department of Internal Audits, and we warehouse all the internal audit data and internal audits. It's not being used for. It's not being used by other departments within the authority.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I just want to make sure I understood how far it reached. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. Then I'll call the vote. Do we have any abstentions? Do we have any no votes? The resolution is approved.
All right.
So the next,
Madam Chair, since it's my turn to go next, with your permission, I'd like to provide an internal audit briefing.
yes, sir. Please do.
Thank you very much. Today, I would like to provide a briefing of the internal audit activities for the period from October 1st, 2020 to January 31st, 2021. Mark Twain, the famous American writer, said a long time ago that what gets us into trouble is not what we don't know, but is what we know for sure that just ain't so. And in the Department of Internal Audit, a big chunk of our work, to simplify it, is to make sure that what we know for sure is really so. COVID has had an enormous global impact, including MARTA, and during the reported period, the Internal Audit Department dedicated a meaningful amount of its audit hours to assisting the authority in its response and recovery efforts from COVID. Next slide, please. During the period, we conducted 4 advisory engagements in the COVID area in the following specific areas of the authority. Cleaning of breathe machines, these are the TVMs and other high-touch areas at rail stations. Cleaning of buses based on COVID-19 and other related SOPs. Cleaning and disinfecting supplies availability related to COVID-19 and proactive ordering procedures. And finally, last but not least, integrated operations center safety procedures related to COVID-19. We made several recommendations as a result of these advisory engagements, primarily in the areas of improving consistency in the application of some of the SOPs. These include primarily the first 2 areas. The last 2 areas, especially the IOC, we made no recommendations. Our observations, which were done before and without prior announcement, so these were surprise inspections, identified that those procedures were followed consistently and well. Next slide, please. In addition to those COVID-19 audits, we finished a follow-up audit of the Capital Improvement Program. In 2017, we issued an audit report which has been used by the authority to create a centralized PMO office and implement other improvements. The original audit identified 28 findings, of which 18 had been completed based on our follow-up audits, and 10 recommendations were well underway of being implemented. Those will be implemented between now and June 30th, 21, and based on the verification that we completed, I have a high degree of confidence that the remaining 10 recommendations will be done. In addition to that, we finished the field work of the cubic automated fare collection system audit. We're currently writing and editing the report. I will report the outcome of that audit during the May Audit Committee meeting. And we're in the fieldwork stage of COVID-19 and expenditure audit. Next slide, please. In terms of what's coming down the pike, we will continue to dedicate part of our audit hours in the return to new normal area and helping the authority really verify the application of COVID-19 relating standard operating procedures. We've made a decision to focus primarily on the cleanliness of the area in various different parts of the authority. Specifically, we will review the replacement of cabin air filters within the bus fleet. We'll also inspect the replacement of rail car air filters. And last but not least, we will verify the current state of the installation of needle point filtration technology at the various MARTA facilities, which we're scheduled to receive those. And I'm hoping to be able to report the outcome of these advisory engagements during the May Audit Committee meeting. Next slide, please. In addition to that, we continue to monitor audit findings that were open in prior periods and through other prior audits. Vertical Transportation is well underway to complete their audit findings, and we'll report those in the May Audit Committee meeting, hopefully. The physical security audit of bus and rail, 3 findings were completed and 2 are in process of being completed. Next slide, please. There's a number of other audits with open findings for a grand total of 18 that are still in the process of being completed. We have one that's past due, but I feel that we can complete that and we can cross the finish line. This is the automated external training request form through Oracle. And in the HR space, in my discussions with LaShonda, they have done a great job updating their procedures and policies. There are a handful left, but because we're auditors, we cannot mark this moderate finding on the last line as complete until we formally get those procedures approved through the proper channels. So 90% done, 10%, just a little bit of road ahead of us, but I'm confident that that one last item that is past due will be completed by the next Audit Committee meeting. Next slide, please. I'll move over to the Information Technology Audit Group. During the current period, they were both helping with our COVID advisory engagements, as well as participating in the cubic fare collection audit. There is a very significant IT component to it, as well as planning an audit that we will be completing in the next several months, which is around software patch management. And I need to decode what that means. That's really installing the security updates on our laptops and servers and other technology. This is a basic component of the cybersecurity protection of any organization. When this doesn't get done, we end up with cases like Equifax, which we don't want to have in security. So an important audit that will be happening in the next several months. Next slide, please. Continue to track prior audit findings. We have 17 in the IT and security audit space. Of those, 6 are being remediated, but are a little past due. Those are significant findings, and 2 of those past due are moderate findings. We'll continue to track and monitor those. And I need to explain here for clarity that before we close an audit finding, we do a pretty extensive verification. It's not simply based on management representation. We actually verify that the finding is closed. Next slide, please. I will move over to the contract audit branch within my organization. The contract audit branch completed 14 audits. They identified $1.1 million in unallowable cost in overhead rate reviews. And just to put a little bit of color here, a big chunk of these $1.1 million was one contractor who included bad debts as part of their overhead rate, which is not allowed under FAR regulation. In addition to that, we identified $287K in unsupported costs in our cost and price analysis. In the pipeline, as of the end of January, we had 16 contract audits that were being processed and reviewed. Next slide, please. The fraud, waste, and abuse hotline has been relatively quiet since the telework was put in place about a year ago. I would not speculate why that's the case because I don't have scientific evidence. But we only received 2 calls from October 1st to January 31st, 2021. One call requested a callback, and when we did the callback, it was determined that the caller's issue had been resolved. And one call was related to really customer service issues and was referred to customer service for resolution. So pretty quiet. Next slide, please. I'd like to give a quick update on other matters to the board and the audit committee. From a personnel standpoint, I have 16 approved and budgeted positions, which include my position. Of those, 3 need to be filled on a permanent basis. The IT audit manager position is currently being vacant, and it's a priority for me to fill. The senior auditor position is also vacant and is being recruited as we speak. Finally, the director of operational audits and fraud investigations is currently being filled in an acting capacity by Charles Middlebrooks, and that will also need to be permanently filled. In addition, I received 1 open records request from WSB TV, more specifically from Richard Belcher, for all of our 2020 operational audit reports. We have complied and submitted those operational audit reports as requested, and Mr. Belcher so far has produced 1 news piece on the vertical transportation audit. I don't know if he will choose to use any of the other reports or not, but I felt obligated to make the audit committee aware of that open records request. Next slide, please. Ms. Hardage, this concludes my presentation today.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions or discussion? All right. The next item on our agenda is a cybersecurity update from Dean Malice. Good morning, Dean.
Good morning, Ms. Hardage, Mr. Parker, and members of the Audit Committee. The SolarWinds hack back in December was purported to have impacted 1,800 companies, mostly government entities. Fortunately, MARTA was not impacted, but it highlights the need for a robust cybersecurity program. And while this hack was not preventable, having the proper infrastructure in place to detect such a hack will limit any potential damage to MARTA's systems, data, and ensure we can continue to move customers safely and securely. Today, you will hear an update of the cybersecurity program. I'm Dean Malice. I'm the AGM of Information and Security, and there are 3 items we're going to cover today. 1, the completed initiatives. 2, the forthcoming initiatives, and how these initiatives protect MARTA. So when we're finished, we'll have a good understanding of what we've accomplished so far and what objectives we've met and what is next up for implementation. Next slide, please. So recently we deployed malicious domain blocking and reporting. This is a free service from the Department of Homeland Security, and I'm a big proponent of utilizing free or reduced services from DHS when we can. And this service works by preventing IT devices from connecting to web domains known to be affiliated with ransomware and other forms of malware, phishing campaigns, and other threats. And it can block up to 90% of those ransomware attacks, and that's the same hack that impacted the city of Atlanta. For FY21/FY22, depending on the procurement cycle here, We're looking to implement the paid version of this service. It provides security for remote users. So we've got a lot of the folks who are out there remotely, and we can't protect those devices from going to those bad domains. It enforces our security policy. It enables better investigations from the alerts, website filtering, and some customizable reports. It's roughly about $43,000 a year, and to me, it's money that's well spent. One of the things that we do is we conduct phishing campaigns. Phishing campaigns are when we send those malicious type looking emails to the authority and see if people click on them, enter their credentials, that type of thing. We completed one in November. We had a 10.3 phish rate. That's kind of the rate of what people will click and enter credentials. Unfortunately, we didn't have anybody enter credentials. The industry standard for an organization our size in transportation is a 27.2. So we're doing pretty good in that aspect. We conducted another phishing campaign after our cybersecurity awareness training, which we completed 89% of the authority. And our phish rate actually went down by 0.9% to 9.4% phish rate, which is good. You know, we're trending in the downward spike way. And as we continue doing the security awareness training, I'm hoping to get that even lower. We'll never get to a zero, but continually to educate the authority and bring that number down is good for the authority. One of the things that we implemented is Microsoft Sentinel. It is Microsoft's log aggregator, and it's part of the big E5 security purchase that we did. And it really works well with the Microsoft product. So we've implemented the free components, quote, free components that we can into that system, and we've started generating alerts out of that. The other implementation that we're in the midst of doing is multi-factor authentication, and I'm sure most are aware that that is when you get a code to your phone, you've got to put your password in, and then you put that code in to log in. We're projected to complete the authority by the end of March. After we do the main user base for all those Microsoft products, the Office, the webmail, the SharePoints, we're going to then implement it for the administrators really sitting in Kirk's team that have that in those elevated accounts. So anytime they do an administrative function, they're going to have to provide that multi-factor authentication as well. Next slide, please. One of the things that we're looking for FY22 is the security switch replacements. And Emil did an audit where we weren't able to kind of pick up devices that are on our network that are not MARTA devices. Well, we've got some aging equipment. So when Cybersecurity applied for the grant from Department of Homeland Security, we put in there that we were going to replace some of these olding infrastructure. It helps Kirk's team because it could provide some funding to that side that's grant funded, and it also helps security because we can start blocking these unauthorized devices on our network. We're looking at replacing our antivirus. We've got an old antiquated antivirus, and with the new Microsoft licensing that we're doing, we've incorporated Windows Defender Advanced Endpoint. Did that for two reasons. It's a very easy implementation because it's already out on the network, and it limits having to engage Kirk's team to then go deploy all these things, which is a major project when we do things like that. So we've purchased the licensing as part of that big Microsoft E5 purchase, and we're going to start turning that on in June, July. One of the things I'm a big proponent of is trying to look at the technologies that we have and see if we can combine things or remove antiquated technologies or redundant technologies. So we currently have a SIM, which is a log aggregator. We've got a vulnerability scanner and some endpoint as well. And I'm looking to find a vendor to kind of take that over, manage the SIM, provide the SIM, do the vulnerability scanning, and provide some additional endpoint protection. What that does for us is it frees up an FTE, full-time employee, from having to do that stuff, that they can focus more on the alerts that we get and kind of that threat hunting around the network. And it also provides 24/7, 365 coverage. What that does for us, again, it frees up more FTEs to do 365, 24/7 requires a fairly sizable workforce, and the cost for this is going to initially be funded out of our FY17 grant that we in cybersecurity acquired for $1 million, and we got about $320,000 left to spend, and we're going to look to close that out. One of the things that we're going to do as well with the Microsoft products is our Microsoft Cloud Application Security, and this provides risk analysis. It goes through all those cloud storages and looks for anomalous behavior. It does some data protection and some threat protection. Another initiative that I'm looking for FY20/22 is as Alstom passes over the train control, they're going to purport to be finishing that project at the end of July. Well, we have to start monitoring that for cyber attacks. And we're looking at a couple of real-time monitoring tools, and we wrote into that grant that we had for the switches as well, monitoring the train control network. So at least for the first year, we'll have grant funds that'll pay for that tool. Something we're looking at for FY22, probably the latter part because it's quite a big initiative, is data loss protection. And what this does is it looks through our cloud instances and emails and stops people from sending that sensitive, like HIPAA data or credit card data or social security numbers out of the network. And it helps us comply with certain policies as well. And then the last thing that we're looking to do this year is, while we've done a penetration test on the train control network and we've done a penetration test on the MARTA enterprise network, and for those that don't know, the penetration test is where you hire a group of hackers, white hat hackers they call them, to try and hack your network. So we've done those tests, and we've got some remediation items that we've done and deficiencies that we've explored. Multi-factor is one of the items that helps remediate some of those penetration test findings. But we're going to look specifically to penetration test applications such as our Breeze card and potentially Oracle, things that hold this sensitive data to make sure those areas are secure. Next slide, please. And this is really an informational slide. It's kind of small, but this is the program that we're building here is based on the NIST risk management framework. And we're actually using, for the first iteration of it, the CIS top 20 security controls, which has controls that help secure your environment. And this is the kind of the status of where we're at. Some of these are down at 0 because we need technologies and some people in to implement those controls, but we're making some good progress getting the first iteration of these controls implemented, and that's the big push for FY21/FY22. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean. Do we have any questions or discussion?
Yes, I have a question, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Pierson.
Dean, just a couple of questions. Is that done across the entire enterprise? Or is that just
the phishing test or the cybersecurity awareness?
Yeah, the phishing test.
It's done across no one is excluded. I've been in organizations where they've wanted to exclude senior leadership because they don't want to potentially embarrass people, but sometimes senior leadership can be your biggest vulnerability. So everybody is subject to it. Unfortunately, our senior leadership has been pretty good about not clicking on things.
Okay, well that's good. So could you give me an idea, what does that look like? Is that 5,000?
I'd have to think it's about
4,000,
3,500 to 4,000 emails that go out.
Okay.
We actually procured a service. It's a cloud-based service, and we build the campaigns. And one of my team members builds that up, and then on a cadence, will fire them out. We're trying to hit monthly. It gets a little bit to do monthly, but we're on a fairly regular cadence of doing this testing. And then what we're going to do, we've done 2 of the full authority. We're going to start doing a couple of these as targeted, targeted groups, like maybe target finance and maybe target some of those critical areas.
Okay, great. My next question has to do with the Microsoft services that you're talking about.
Yes, sir.
how do you handle password updates? I mean, does this system go out and says you need to update your passwords at certain times, or is that something that's necessary if they're on the network and that's not a requirement? I know it, and I'm thinking from my standpoint of how I use my Microsoft, and it sometimes if I get one password compromised, it asks me to update all of them, and I just find that kind of annoying. But you know, I was just wondering.
So we're on a cadence here, and it's a 90-day cadence for password resets.
All right.
And part of our cybersecurity awareness training, and this is really for everyone on our call as well, is and this is just public service, don't reuse passwords, because there are so many breaches that if your one password gets breached and you're using it across multiple, then all those systems are breached. But we do a 90-day cadence on password resets. The multi-factor is only for when we're offline, so if people are connecting in from outside of the MARTA network, and that lasts about 3 or 4 days, and then if they change networks or change a password, or after 3 to 4 days, they have to re-enter that code in.
Okay.
Trying to balance security with user, you know, don't want to make it miserable for people. We're trying to balance that.
Okay, great. Because I remember at one time we had these little bitty meters that always clicked off passwords, and whenever we used them, we had to have the meter sitting next to you, and it was a new password every time.
Yeah, those are the multi-factor codes.
Yes.
Those little, we're doing that with text to the phone right now. It's a cost savings because those little key fobs, they can cost, you know, to do the whole authority cost $100,000, and it's something you got to do every year.
Okay.
But, you know, we try and adjust and look, and I've been talking with Kirk about other means of doing protection that might be a little bit better, but it's something that'll take some time.
All right. Thank you, Dean. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Frierson. Do we have any other questions? Well, before I close the audit committee, I would like to say that I just saw Mr. Parker sent an email that today is Transit Driver Appreciation Day for MARTA. So we'd like to wish all of our transit drivers a great day and appreciate so much everything that you do. So with that, I will close the audit committee of MARTA, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. Thank you.